Good day, and thank you for watching. If you're going through a divorce in California, there is one issue that can affect your finances for years to come. That issue is property division. And more specifically, understanding the difference between separate property and community property. Because what gets divided and what doesn't depends on that distinction. Let's start with the basics. California is a community property state. That means that in general, assets and debts acquired during the marriage are considered community property. And community property is typically divided equally between the spouses. But here's the key. Not everything is community property. Not everything is community property. Some assets may be considered separate property, and separate property is not subject to division. So what is separate property? Separate property generally includes assets that were owned before the marriage. It can also include gifts or inheritances received by one spouse during the marriage. And in some cases, it can include property that was acquired after separation. Now here's where things get complicated. Just because something started as separate property does not always mean it stays separate. Now let's move on to the next chapter and talk about the important legal issue of property commingling. Commingling occurs when separate and community property are mixed together. For example, if you deposit separate funds into a joint account and then use that account for shared expenses, it may become difficult to trace what portion remains separate. And when that happens, the asset may be treated as community property. Now let's talk about another issue, transmutation. This refers to a change in the character of property. For example, separate property may be intentionally converted into community property or vice versa. But for that change to be valid, it must meet specific legal requirements. Now let's talk about real estate. A home purchased during the marriage is typically considered community property. But what if one spouse used separate funds for the down payment? That may create a reimbursement claim, meaning that spouse may be entitled to recover the separate contribution. But again, this depends on documentation and how the property was handled. Now let's talk about the division of debts. Just like assets, debts are also divided. Debts incurred during the marriage are generally considered community debts, and they may be divided equally. These situations can be complex and often require detailed analysis. Here's where many people make a mistake. They assume that if a debt is in one person's name, it belongs only to that person. But in California, that is not always the case. If the debt was incurred during the marriage, it may still be considered community. Now let's talk about timing. The date of separation plays an important role in determining what is community and what is separate. Assets and debts acquired after separation may be considered separate. But defining the date of separation is not always straightforward. It involves both physical separation and the intent to end the marriage. Now let's discuss the critical role of documentation. Proper documentation is absolutely critical in these cases. If you are claiming that something is separate property, you need to be able to prove it. That may include bank records, purchase documents, or other financial records. Without documentation, it can be difficult to establish the nature of the property. Now let's talk about business interests. If a business was started during the marriage, it may be considered community property. But if it existed before the marriage and grew during the marriage, there may be a division between separate and community interests. This includes credit cards, loans, and other financial obligations. Now, let's address another common misunderstanding. Some people believe that everything is automatically split 50-50. But the first step is classification, determining whether something is community or separate. Only after that does division come into play. Now let's talk about strategy. Property division is not just about listing assets and debts. It's about understanding how they are classified. It's also about identifying issues like commingling, reimbursement, and valuation, and how they were used. It's also about identifying issues like commingling, reimbursement, and valuation, because all of these factors can affect the outcome. Now let's look at the bigger picture. Property division in California is based on principles of fairness and legal standards, but applying those standards requires careful analysis. And small details can make a significant difference in the outcome. Finally, let's talk about expectations. Property division can be one of the most contested parts of a divorce. It can involve complex financial issues, and it can take time to resolve. But understanding the basic principles can help you navigate the process more effectively. In conclusion, the difference between separate and community property in California is critical. It determines what gets divided and what does not. It affects your financial future, and it requires careful documentation and analysis. If you're going through a divorce and have questions about property division, take the time to understand your situation. Call us at 888-888-6582. I'm Vince Davis, and we are all in this together.